Good morning from London. I'm Andrew Zemek and welcome on behalf of the CPM Group. Today we'll be talking about high purity manganese sulfate and high purity manganese products in general. And the purpose of this video is to bring you a market update. Our last video was recorded in June 2022. That was for PDAC conference in Toronto last year. Unfortunately, this year I cannot be with you again for reasons that I will be traveling in China, visiting high purity manganese industrial plants there to gain more insight into the market. So this video is instead of my personal presence at the PDAC conference. 9 months, it's a long period in the battery metals markets and in electric vehicle markets. A lot of things have changed since we last spoke. On the other hand, a lot of things has not changed, and the overall picture is still very much the same and very positive for manganese. So in spite of passage of time, I still encourage you to watch our previous video on this subject, which will give you much more grounding. This is just a market research update on the high purity manganese market. Manganese continues to make headlines in the battery world, even though some analysts still consider it to be a forgotten metal, apparently, because they omit it from their presentations, infographics, and projections. Just a few months ago, I saw a very interesting infographic produced by one of the leading UK battery consultancies, and they were listing all the battery metals there, lithium, graphite, nickel, cobalt, and manganese was conspicuously absent. Nonetheless, it is still moving right and center of the battery world. Let's just remind ourselves that the rise of manganese as a battery metal is to a large extent due to the problems with cobalt, its high price, its price volatility, and the fact that 65 to 70% of cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. It was for some time that battery engineers tried to engineer cobalt out of batteries, and the answer to their problem was to use more manganese. Battery chemistries continue to evolve and new subspecies appear all the time. So recently we saw an emergence of NMC 451, which is a subspecies of 370, and also an emergence of NMC 90half, that's the subspecies of 811. As you can see, in both cases, we see less manganese being used than before, but these subspecies are not eliminating their parent species, they are just in addition to it. We also have a new abbreviation entering the battery vocabulary, which is HLM, highly lithiated manganese or high lithium manganese, depending whom you listen to. There are different explanations for this abbreviation. And the big pioneer of this new invention, if you like, is European chemical producer Umicore. And let me just read you a fragment from their press release just in February this year. Umicore is starting the industrialization of its leading manganese-rich HLM, high lithium manganese cathode active materials, and targets commercial production and use in electric vehicles in 2026. This major milestone introduces a distinctly competitive technology to other design-to-cost battery technologies for EVs and complements Umicore's broad portfolio of NMC batteries for long-range EVs. The press release continues, stating, HML is gaining traction with current battery cell manufacturers as a differentiating lower cost, high energy density, and sustainable battery technology. And it continues, HLM offers a better total cost of ownership than LFP, with longer driving ranges, equivalent safety, much more reliable SOC, state of charge monitoring, and better recyclability. CPM understands that these batteries are using up to 60% of manganese in their cathode. Another milestone is the beginning of commercialization of LMFPs, which is the LFP batteries, the main competitor to NMCs, which started using manganese in addition to iron in their cathode. The first commercially produced batteries will appear in 2023, and by the time you reach 2031, we expect about 50% of all LFP batteries to be LMFPs. This will have significant impact on manganese demand, high purity manganese demand, because depending which technology you're talking about, the replacement of iron with manganese will be something like between 40 and 60%. So this creates a lot new demand for high purity manganese, which we haven't seen before. All these new manganese-rich batteries, they require very high purity material, in this case high purity manganese sulfate. But high purity is not the only requirements of the battery material buyers. They also want their suppliers to be complying with high ESG standards, environmental, social, and governance standards, which again started becoming a very important element in distinguishing between different suppliers. So let's have a look at some of these aspects of the battery market and how it might impact the supply and demand calculations for high purity manganese sulfate. The so-called battery passports have been on the cards for quite a while, but in January 2023 they became a reality. So what are they and what impact on the manganese market they might have? They may not look like the one which you see behind me, but they will fulfill a very similar role to the human beings' passports, citizen passports. They will record all the information about the battery, its history, and they go even further than human passports because they ask you about your parents and grandparents. So in case of manganese, they will be also asking about the provenance of the manganese sulfate, where it came from, was it produced free from child labor, what is this carbon footprint, does it meet the ESG requirements, and so on and so forth. The battery passports were officially introduced in January 2023 at the meetings of the heads of state in Davos, Switzerland. And the European Union has a plan to make them compulsory on their territory from 2026, in just 3 years from now. We think that, however good idea it is to have the battery passports recording all this information about materials which went into the battery, they may be a barrier to entry to the new entrants of the market, which will have to provide all this information and have it traceable and so on and so forth. So we probably see big differentiation in pricing between different suppliers, and those who will be able to provide those battery passports and will have a good credentials written to those passports, they will probably secure a fast track to access to the gates of the battery and cathode makers. With so much happening in the high purity manganese market, you would have thought that the supply side would be responding very vividly to this new demand, but this is not happening as yet. It looks as if the supply side of the industry is either still asleep or only just about waking up. Since our last video, only one small project started production in Indonesia. There were virtually no new announcements apart from several companies making clear their intention that they want to produce for the battery industry, but with no dates, no specific concrete plans, just a couple of announcements of scoping studies and pre-feasibility studies. So on the supply side, the situation is pretty much unchanged since our last video. The Chinese production in 2022 seems to have been static, or if it rose by single digits, probably about 5%. We're still waiting for the final numbers to come out from China, and I hope to find out during my visit what was the real picture there. So why is it so? Why is the supply side not responding to this very good news from the demand side about manganese-based batteries moving front and center of the battery industry. I think the partial answer to this question is that we are currently in a situation of a small surplus, which is directly related to the Chinese lockdowns in 2022, and also to a spike in prices 6 months before that, before the end of 2022, and a lot of stocks being made when the price was on the way up. Battery makers didn't want to pay any more, so they're buying more material, and now they are consuming these stocks. But as you know, markets are volatile. Surplus, particularly a small surplus, doesn't last long. Situation changes, and just look at the lithium market and what happened to its price and its supply and demand situation. We think manganese may go similar way, maybe not such a meteoric rise like in case of the case of lithium, but still very significant rise in prices, particularly after 2026. As you can see from our supply and demand chart, there is a structural deficit emerging after 2026, even with most optimistic supply scenarios. This year, we introduced for the first time the so-called banded supply chart. Rather than just adding the capacity of all the projects in the pipeline, we rated them according to the probability of them coming on stream in the time frame announced. And as you can see on the chart behind me, the lighter the band, the less probability, less likelihood of this project coming to production before 2031. So as you can see, after 2026, even with the most optimistic supply scenario, we still have a structural deficit in this high purity manganese market. This chart is showing a global picture. A situation in North America and in Europe may be quite different, I think with even sharper deficit. The reason for it is that these two markets are very much committed to building local supply chains and giving preference to local suppliers or regional suppliers rather than buying everything from China. And this may have an impact on the total imbalances in these markets, local imbalances in these markets, and may also have a significant impact on pricing. We see in the future that the Asian pricing and European pricing and North American pricing could be distinctively different rather than having one global price for high purity manganese products. Finally, let me remind you that in spite of the future being bright for manganese and getting brighter by the day, the usual caveats are still with us, that the adoption rate of electric vehicles may not be as fast as we expect it to be, that the price of materials may be higher than expected, hence the prices of the batteries and the vehicles may be not falling as rapidly as many hope, and hence the sales may not be significant. The deficits in other markets like lithium, nickel, graphite, cobalt may also dampen the demand for the batteries, or may rather not dampen but restrict the demand for batteries, and hence there could be less demand for manganese as well. So there are many moving parts in this picture, and having good intelligence and up-to-date information is very critical for anyone contemplating entering this market and making a good profit there. But with all other things being equal, we think manganese is a clear winner. Nobody is trying to engineer manganese out of batteries. On the contrary, people are increasing the quantity of it in their batteries. It's a very stable element. It's relatively cheap compared to, say, cobalt. Historically, manganese was 10 to 33 times cheaper than cobalt. It's the cheapest of the battery metals. It is in abundance, at least manganese ore is in abundance. The processing facilities to make it into high purity sulfate is a different story. This is where we see the deficit. But there are no reasons for battery makers to abandon manganese in favor of something else. We think it is going to stay here for a long time. The CPM Group has been following developments in high purity manganese on a regular basis since 2011. And even before that, we looked at manganese several times in an ad hoc reports. So we have a significant track record in following this material. And if you need any assistance in understanding this market, feel free to give us a call. The details will be shown in a minute. And we will be more than happy to assist you. Manganese has a bright future. Thank you.